Welcome to the second unit in our Speechcarft Fundamentals series. In Unit 1, you learned the importance of a strong, clear message and how every point you make must support that message. Well, today you're going to learn how to structure your points around that message, and you have a couple of options about how to do that. Sometimes the best way to lay out your points is chronologically. This is especially true if your speech is story-based and each point you're making builds on what you learned earlier. Well, then tell the stories in the order that they happened. For example, I might stand before an audience and say, today you're going to hear the 3 things I learned that made me the man I am. You're going to hear what I learned in high school, then what I learned in college, and then what I learned after I was married. Now, if each one of those builds on what I told you before, then it makes sense to tell them to you in the order they happened. Sometimes chronology, sometimes the timeline is the best structure. Now, if chronologically is not the most obvious way to structure your points, then you have some more flexibility. You can be a bit more creative, possibly come up with an acronym. Acronyms actually help people remember stuff. So let's talk about the same speech. 3 things I learned that made me the man I am today. Perhaps the 3 points I'm going to make are, when I had my first job, I learned I needed to be meticulous, and then I would develop that point. After I got married, I learned I needed to be accountable, and I would develop that point. And when I was in college, things were constantly changing. I learned that I needed to be nimble. After I give the introduction to my speech, I would give the audience my roadmap and say, today you're going to hear the 3 things I learned that made me the man I am today, and if you pay attention, you'll realize that the 3 things I learned spell out the word man. And as I do my speech, it would become obvious that MAN stands for meticulous, accountable, and nimble. Acronyms are a really good way to help people remember your points and, by extrapolation, remember your message. This is sort of a special case of the acronym idea I just gave you. Sometimes you can get all the points in your speech to start with the same letter. For example, there's a storytelling workshop I do where after I give my introduction, I say, today you are going to learn the 5 C's of storytelling. 5 elements every story needs to be compelling and get your point across, and they all happen to start with the letter C. Now that way, as I'm doing the presentation, people can keep track of where I am along the way. Oh, we're only on the 3rd C right now. And afterwards, it's going to be a lot easier for them to remember those 5 elements because they all start with the same letter. See? Now this last one may be my favorite way to structure a speech. Give your points some sort of visual representation. Here's what I mean by visual. Today you're going to learn the 3 keys to success. Now what do keys do? Keys unlock something, don't they? Well, in this case, you're teaching your audience how they can unlock success. Or perhaps, here are the 4 steps to becoming a better speaker. Well, what do steps do? Steps lead somewhere, don't they? And in this case, you are leading your audience towards becoming a better speaker. Or, here are the 5 career tools you desperately need. Well, what do tools do? Tools build something up, don't they? Well, in this case, you are teaching your audience how to build on their career. The visual representation method for structuring your speech is very good if your speech is of the how-to variety. If for no other reason, it gives you a much more catchy title. For example, you could give a speech like, How to Build Your Career. Or you can give 5 career building tools you desperately need. I'll tell you which speech I'd rather hear, the second one. So those are 3 great ways you can structure your speech. You can lay out your points chronologically, you can come up with some sort of acronym to sum up your points, or you can use something visual like keys, steps, or tools. What you do is you encapsulate that idea and you deliver it to your audience after your introduction, but before you give your first point. So you would give your introduction and then make the transition and say, well, today you are going to get those 5 career building tools you so desperately need. Then you launch into your first point. Now what this does is it helps your audience keep track of where you are in your speech. Oh, he promised us 5 career building tools. He's only given us 2. I know I'm in for 3 more. I mentioned in the first unit of Speechcarft Fundamentals that sometimes you are forced to write a speech when all you have is a topic. You don't have a message, much less points to support a message. How do you come up with a speech for that? There is an emergency measure you can use to write a speech in those situations, and you will get that in the next video, I promise. I needed you to fully understand the normal way to approach Speechcarft. First, you come up with a message, then you come up with points to support your message, and then you structure that speech. You learn how to treat the normal. Next time, you will learn how to treat the pathological, I promise. So keep it tuned here to lastwrites.com for more speaking tips. That's last-writes.com. And together we, that's you and I, we will lay boring speeches to rest by giving them the last rites.